All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Bruner. I am the Exotic Forest Pest Specialist with Purdue University's Department of Entomology. And today is, I believe, our fourth session of Emerald Ash Borer University for our fall 2025 semester. Depending on where you are right now, it is either very snowy, very rainy, but it is undoubtedly cold, so we're not worried about insects at the moment, but now is a great time to learn about them. And today we are hosting Kelly Oten from North Carolina State University, who is going to be talking to us about elm zigzag sawfly. So, Kelly, please take it away.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. We are down here in North Carolina, so we are getting just that cold rain, and I really wish that we had snow. We might have snow Friday. All my kids are very much looking forward to that and hoping for a canceled school day. But like Bob said, I am here today to talk about the elm zigzag sawfly. This is a relatively new invader in our forests. So I'm going to share what we know already, some of the stuff that we're working on, some of the things that we found out in the recent years, what its impact might be, and then maybe some suggestions for management. Again, this is all things that we are learning as we go because it is such a new invader. So let's dive in. What is this insect that I'm talking about? Elm zigzag sawfly. So the elm zigzag sawfly is a sawfly. As the name implies, it is a primitive form of wasp, which in its larval form is a defoliator. You can see the larva on the left there, bright green, kind of pale. Sometimes they're more whitish in coloration. And the way you can tell it apart from other larvae is to look mostly around the head and the thorax area. You'll see a black band crossing the eyes and then T-shaped markings on the second and third thoracic legs. The first pair does not have it. Sometimes they're black in appearance, sometimes they're brown, but they're always there. The adult, you can see a little more nondescript, this kind of brownish, blackish color. It has smoky brown wings that are held over its abdomen when it's at rest. And she has whitish to yellowish legs, which you can see there in the photo. Now you know that it's a sawfly and how to identify it. But that nickname, Elm Zigzag, or I guess the ESA approved common name, Zigzag, refers to the feeding pattern that it has. And I have to say, as an entomologist, and I always love all the new things that I see with insects, they always amaze me. This has got to be the coolest defoliation pattern I've ever seen. They make this zigzag pattern from the tip of the serration. So the eggs are laid at the tip of each one of those serrations on the leaf, and then they go in towards the center of the leaf just like that. And if you look closely, you can see a little tiny larva in each one of those channels right there. So they are relatively small, especially when they, first close, but they don't get much bigger. Like as a forester and, forest health person, whenever I think sawfly, red-headed pine sawfly comes to mind. Nothing near that size for elm zigzag sawfly, but very, very cool defoliation pattern. Again, you can see closer up how those larvae are eating. Now on the top there, you'll see a larva that is a little bit larger. And you'll see its feeding pattern completely changes. So it abandons that zigzag feeding channel and then it basically just mows down the leaf. Usually it just leaves those thick veins. Sometimes it's just the mid vein, sometimes it's the mid vein and thicker lateral veins as well. So as they get bigger, they do eat all of those tissues, and as a result, they likely remove a lot of those zigzags that younger instars created. Here's just more images. Sometimes you don't see it, as many channels in a leaf, but it is very, very obvious when you see these zigzag patterns. Now, again, as they get older, they do feed a little differently. You'll see the progression here, how it's more zigzag on the left two images there. And then the larva feeds more wholly on the leaf, and you can see the mid vein and just some of those thicker lateral veins remaining. And what that does is, if you get high enough populations of this insect, you can get really dramatic defoliation events. This was actually the very first report that we had in North Carolina. up in Stokes and Surrey County, right on the county line there. The picture on the left are large, mature American elms, and the picture on the right are on a property a few properties down the road, and those are winged elm. Now, something that we, always get questions about. These make a very characteristic feeding pattern, but do other insects make it? And the answer is there are a few, but you're way less likely to encounter them. There's a Ceractifera species that makes a zigzag pattern. You can see it on the images there. It looks very, very similar to zigzag sawfly, even down to the cocoon, which I'll show you a little bit later. It baffles me that these aren't even in the same genus, but their behaviors and their appearance are very, very similar. But big difference, they feed on prunus species only, so they will not be attacking elm as far as we know. There's also the dusky birch sawfly, which feeds more wholly and doesn't really have as clear of a zigzag pattern, but sometimes they do look a little bit zigzaggy, so important to point out. And then again, it's on birch, so not something that you're going to see on elm. So if you see zigzags in the leaves of elm trees, then that's what you know you have. So what kind of elms? Really, basically all of them that we have here in North Carolina. American elm are recorded in many of the states where elm zigzag sawfly has been reported, as well as Siberian elm. There are anecdotal reports that in locations where there's Siberian elm, which is a non-native and in some areas considered invasive tree in and of itself, but there are some reports that Siberian elm is actually preferred as a host over to American elm. We have not recorded it down here in North Carolina. All of our infestations have been on American elm and winged elm. But there have been reports of it on Chinese elm, which that's a pretty big deal if you think of all the lacebark elms you see in our urban environments. I have one in my front yard because the city planted it between that wonderful space between the sidewalk and the curb, but is a very popular urban planting, so something to be aware of. Also, English elm, slippery elm, and then a Japanese by Siberian hybrid, which is called cathedral. So not great. And what is the value that we see in elms? Historically, they held a lot higher value than we see today, simply because we lost a lot of them. But historically, they were a prized and favored street tree. Almost every town in the nation has an elm street because these were such prominently planted urban trees. They have a beautiful vase-like canopy. They're really tolerant of very poor soils that are often found in urban environments, and they're pretty fast growing. So all of those characteristics made it a really good choice for elm, or for planting in urban areas. Now, as a lot of you are probably aware, Dutch elm disease came into the picture in the early 1900s. This is a non-native pathogen or a disease caused by a non-native pathogen and vectored by several species of bark beetles, one invasive, one native. And it has killed the vast majority of the elm trees in our nation. You can kind of see the epicenter there in Ohio in 1930 and how it radiated outward and really just engulfed a lot of the areas where elm was prominent. To see it on the picture scale, because pictures are really impactful, this is a street that was lined with elm trees. Maybe it was named Elm Street. I have no idea. But when Dutch elm disease came through and killed all of those trees, they had to replant them. And sadly enough, a lot of areas replanted with ash trees, which seemed great at the time, given the characteristics we know of ash, a good urban planting. But you're here at Emerald Ash Borer University, so you're probably already aware of what happened to all of those ash trees that replaced the elm. So hopefully there's a lesson there in diversifying our urban plantings a little bit. And there's actually a lot of pushes in a lot of municipalities to diversify urban canopies, and this is likely one of those reasons. But even though we lost a lot of our elms, They're still present in our urban and forest settings. In North Carolina alone, we have 202 million elm trees. And that is a lot of trees, but in the forest, that's really less than, it's about 1.5% of our forest. Now, this does not include urban trees. These are just in our North Carolina forests. So they do hold ecological value. They hold aesthetic value, particularly in our urban areas. We have a lot of Chinese elm that are planted in urban areas as well. And there has been a breeding program to create Dutch elm disease resistant elm trees that can be replanted into our urban settings. So they've been pretty successful. One of the most popular varieties there is called the Princeton elm. And again, you can see that beautiful vase-like canopy and how it grows, and it is resistant to Dutch elm disease. Um, there is concern that as elm zigzag sawfly feeds on these trees, if it feeds on them, then they may stress or weaken the trees and potentially attract those bark beetles that might be vectoring that pathogen that causes Dutch elm disease. Most bark beetles are attracted to declining trees, so stress that elm zigzag sawfly causes might make them more susceptible to disease. That is still unknown. That is just a hypothetical and kind of a fear at this point, and wondering what the true impacts of elm zigzag sawfly in North America are going to be. So I started off with a horror story. I know what you're gonna, or I know what you did last summer, because this is an insect that is very active all summer long, and then diapauses over the winter. But the reality is, it's really more like A Nightmare on Elm Street, another one of my classic favorite horror movies out there. But it doesn't stop there. When we first found elm zigzag sawfly in North Carolina and we started talking to people, one of the questions we got a lot was, will it attack anything else? Primarily Zelkova. Zelkova is a very widely planted urban tree, and it is in the same family as elm, which is Ulmaceae. So that's where the concern came from. It is widely planted because it can tolerate the urban environment, has very attractive foliage and shape, and it's resistant to Dutch elm disease. So you can plant it in a lot of those places where you lost elm, and it does really well. So we got this question, even though it's not a native tree, we wanted to see if we could answer it. So we started by doing feeding bioassays. We started in an environmental chamber, but eventually moved to potted elm trees or elm and Zelkova trees in a greenhouse. We caged sleeves, and we reared adults from field collected larvae in environmental chambers. And then within 24 hours of them eclosing from their pupa, we put them in those mesh cloths to see if they would oviposit. And lo and behold, they did. So we had 36 eggs that were laid by elm zigzag sawfly on Zelkova serrata, and these were on the varieties Musashino and Green Vase. These are probably the two most popular varieties of Zelkova serrata, which is Japanese Zelkova, most widely planted and most easily attainable for those that are planting in the urban landscape. So this told us they will oviposit on it if they are given no choice, right? Sometimes insects can be desperate and they got to do what they got to do. So we brought this to the field. We planted these varieties in the field up in Ohio. This was actually very close to or in the plantings of the Dutch elm disease resistance trials that are being done by the Northern Research Station, Kathleen Knight's group up there. So we planted Zelkova nearby. They were already infested with elm zigzag sawfly, not the Zelkova, the elms. So we knew elm zigzag sawfly was in the area. So we planted these 4 trees, 2 Musashino, 2 Green Vase, and just wanted to see what would happen. And lo and behold, they were oviposited upon by elm zigzag sawfly. They were fed upon. You can see those zigzag channels on the Musashino tree. Interestingly, they only oviposited and fed on Musashino. They did not seem interested in the other one, but that's not to say they wouldn't. We've only done this 1 year, and we only had 4 trees, and one of the trees was in really poor health. So we will be looking more closely at this, but as of right now, we do know they will oviposit and they will feed on Zelkova serrata, at least Musashino, in the field. They also pupated on it after feeding. You can see those those pupae within the cocoons right there. You can kind of see a net-like cocoon. And upon inspection, we did come back and find that those cocoons were later empty within a week. So, complete life cycle that was completed on Zelkova. So, not great, right? It's expanding its range. However, the interesting thing is, Zelkova actually leafed out before the elm did in the area. And once the elms leafed out, these Zelkova trees were not touched by elm zigzag sawfly. So, we hypothesize that this is likely an alternate host, but will also be a very good food source for those sawflies that emerge in the spring looking for something to lay their eggs on, and the elms haven't leafed out yet. So it will probably be aiding them, although it does not seem like it is a preferred host. So I'm already, kind of telling you this story of this invasive insect, non-native to here. But how did this story all unfold? Like a lot of insects, community science has played a very large role in detecting this insect. We've seen this a lot with Asian longhorn beetle, with spotted lanternfly, and now with elm zigzag sawfly. All of these, we really benefit from the general public as far as detecting them in new areas and tracking them as they spread. Now, with elm zigzag sawfly, the very first report in North America that was confirmed as elm zigzag sawfly happened in August of 2020 in Quebec, Canada. So someone posted this picture that you see here on the left on iNaturalist, and it was noticed by someone, I believe, with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And they immediately did a field visit and confirmed that it was elm zigzag sawfly. And this was the first confirmation in North America. About a year later, we got the first confirmation in the US, and it was all the way down there in Virginia. And they found the feeding patterns, they found specimens, but this actually traced back a year prior when someone noticed the defoliation pattern, but they didn't have a specimen to confirm it. So it was likely already there. We know that with a lot of invasive insects, once we detect it, it had probably already been there for quite some time. So it had been there earlier. Who knows where the point of introduction was? There is a theory that it's had maybe 2 points of introduction because we do seem to see two kind of general areas where the earliest detections arise from. However, the earliest detection was actually a picture posted on Bug Guide from Maryland. So just to make this more of an interesting story to piece together, this is the earliest report that we have of elm zigzag sawfly in the US. But as those trickled in, as we kind of pieced the puzzle together, this insect spread. Once we became aware of it, people start looking more. So it started popping up all over the place. In 2021, lots of Virginia counties became positive. They saw defoliation in Pennsylvania. And then in 2022, we hit a lot of new states. So I believe we were up to 5 states by 2022. Maryland, we saw defoliation. And the reports keep trickling in. We have multiple times now found a report on iNaturalist, and we're able to get in touch with the state or let them know that it was there. And then they followed up and have been able to confirm elm zigzag sawfly in their state. So it is something we are encouraging the general public to continue posting because it does help us track the spread and it does help us find it. And thankfully, it does have that very unique feeding pattern. And again, if it's on an elm, there's really nothing else that it could be. This is where we currently stand. This is the current range map of the elm zigzag sawfly in the United States. Now, do I think the range is actually this spotty? No, I don't. I think this is a pretty cryptic species. It's really, you only see it if you look for it in a lot of cases, not all the cases, which I'll get to when we get to impacts. But it has spread very far in a very short period of time. Again, this is only US detections, but 2021 to 2025, you can see how many states, how many counties have been lit up since then. This is including Canada. You can see it's spread in Canada as well, year by year detection and how vast the range spread of elm zigzag sawfly has been. So yes, we have a new invasive, but we are not the first area to have elm zigzag sawfly as an invasive. In Europe, it was actually detected in 2003, and then it spread widely from there. So a lot of what we know about elm zigzag sawfly and what we knew when we first detected it in North America came from the fact that it wasn't invasive for almost 20 years by the time it was detected here. There in Europe, it does cause dieback. It does cause aesthetic issues because it attacks a lot of urban trees. There have been reports of large elm acreage defoliated by elm zigzag sawfly. And in some cases, they've even had smaller trees or new plantings die from massive infestation. So, something that we're going to be aware of, especially as we are trying to evaluate how bad elm zigzag sawfly is going to be. I already mentioned that this is a pretty cryptic species. You would not have expected this tree on the left to have elm zigzag sawfly on it if this county ranger with the North Carolina Forest Service, Jonathan Young, hadn't stopped and looked. So once he stopped and looked, he saw the zigzag pattern. He saw it, all over, especially on the bottom branches. We do generally see a bottom up defoliation pattern with this insect. But now, obviously, that contrasts greatly with the American elm on the right. So the defoliation can really, really range in severity. And it's hard to tell what factors might be at play, if it's environmental, if it's lack of natural enemies, if something else is going on. We really don't know all those population dynamics yet. But the good news is it is a defoliator. When we think of insects or diseases that cause widespread mortality events, rarely is it a defoliator. Usually it's a wood-boring insect, a bark beetle, or a disease. So trees can usually handle a defoliation event. And we saw that happen. So that same tree that I just showed you, which we first found infested in August of 2022, a month and a half later, it was putting out a secondary flush. Was a little bit confused because it was November, maybe. But it did put out a secondary flush, and then the following spring, it flushed out beautifully. So we were like, okay, well, maybe these impacts won't be so bad. So this is actually a tree that we monitored over time, and we have already seen some impacts as well. Um, we did do a survey. We had all the Department of Ags from different states, the Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, participate in a survey to try to detect elm zigzag sawfly in other areas. And part of that survey was asking them to document the severity of the defoliation. And you can see the vast majority of it. The vast majority of them were in the 0 to 2% range, but it's when you get to the 50 to 75 or 76 to 100% that you're looking at impacts greater than just aesthetics and maybe long-term health impacts. So here's a look at what some of that defoliation can be. On the left there, a heavily defoliated branch. That tree that's on the right there, that's we monitored over time. Have a picture of it healthy on the left there, and a picture of it on the right, year by year. So that's the picture on the right is the end of the summer in 2022, after several defoliation events by the various generations. This is that tree at the end of the summer in 2023. This is that tree at the end of the summer in 2024. And in 2025, when that tree leafed out in the spring, is when we first recorded dieback on some of those bottom branches. So we are continuing to monitor this tree, um, and see how it either recovers and or succumbs even greater, and what those impacts might be, particularly if mortality is involved. These are new hosts. Then it's Asian range and it's European range. So we are curious as to how it will impact our American elm here. All right, so let's dig into the life cycle a little bit, because I've talked about generations and especially what the larvae do. This is the general life cycle as a wasp. It goes through all four stages: the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. The eggs are laid on the tip of the leaves there. It's actually laid between the upper and bottom of, I guess, cuticle of the leaf. So it's actually inside the leaf, but it kind of looks like this little swollen gland there. In 4 to 8 days, they close. So it is a very fast succession. from the egg being laid to it actually emerging as a larva. This is the larva right on the right there. They feed for anywhere from 10 to 18 days and they go through 6 instars. Again, it's that green color with that black band through the eye and the black T's on the legs. This is a closer image showing those markings. Again, this is a pretty green one, but they can be more pale green or white in appearance, particularly when they're young, or mostly when they're young. By the time they get into older instars, they are more of that green color. So then we get to the pupa, and the pupa is a very interesting stage for this insect. It spins a cocoon, and typically it pupates in 2 to 3 days after the cocoon is spun. But it does have seasonally dimorphic cocoons, which means it has a summer cocoon and a winter cocoon, as we call it. So the summer cocoon is more of this like whitish, lightly colored net-like material that goes around the larva. And then after a few days, the larva will pupate within that cocoon. And that picture on the right there is what we call the overwintering or the winter cocoon. And it is more densely spun, not as transparent. And the larva is within that, and it pupates within that. And that is the stage that it overwinters as. Now, the summer cocoons are typically attached to branches and leaves that stays in the canopy, but when they're ready to overwinter, they will drop to the ground, bore to the soil, or be in like that upper leaf litter layer, and then that's where they will spin their overwintering cocoon. Now, interestingly, they go through multiple generations a year, which I'll get to in a second. Interestingly, every generation that they go through, a small proportion of each generation has an overwintering cocoon portion of the life cycle, suggesting that it's a mechanism of survival. If some crazy weather event were to happen midsummer, there are some of the population already overwintering within the soil. Then you get to the adult. They are relatively small, 7 to 8 millimeters. They are parthenogenetic, so there are only females that have ever been observed of this species, which also means as soon as they eclose from their pupa in the spring, they can immediately start laying eggs. They don't have to feed, they just go at it. In fact, when we monitor our sites, we go weekly. And week 1, there will be 0 adults, 0 larvae. And then we come back 1 week later. And in that 1 week period, adults are out, eggs have been laid, and we already have feeding larvae. So it happens very, very, very quickly. One female, anywhere between 7 and 49 eggs have been documented. Now, if you kept track with how many days I said, you can see one generation lasts about 20 to 36 days. So we do see multiple generations a year. When they emerge, typically in North Carolina, we see it in mid-April, but in other areas, they've reported it in late April, and occasionally we'll hear about it in early May. But mid to late April is typically when we expect emergence. Now, you will see here that in North Carolina, elm leaves out before adult emergence, but in more northern areas, that does not happen, and that's where Zelkova can play a role. So back to the volcanism, it is highly variable. We have recorded anywhere between 1 and 5 generations per year in various states in the US and in North Carolina. In Europe, they've recorded 2 to 4 generations a year, and in some cases up to 5 or even 6, but those are typically one-offs and not typical. Russia, 2 to 4 generations a year, and Japan, 4 generations per year. So highly variable, and it's not even the same in one area. Like we will have reports of 2 generations one year, and then the following year they'll record 3 generations. So again, the factors that are at play here, we really don't know. But it is spreading quickly, like I already mentioned. The adults are described as active flyers, but this is really based on the timing of when reports came in, and an estimated 45 to 90 kilometers per year can be spread by this insect, and that's about mid-20s miles per year. But of greater concern are the ability of the larvae or the pupae to act as hitchhikers and transport on material that we're unaware of. So again, larvae are on leaves. The summer cocoons are attached to leaves. If we're moving infested material, it could easily hitchhike. But of even greater concern, we have seen cocoons attached to inanimate objects. Well, I guess trees are inanimate, but human-made objects or man-made objects, and also objects that might move. So on the right here, there's a wooden post from a fence, and a cocoon is attached to it. So if they're attaching to wood and we move wood, we've also had reports of them on vehicles. So this is the bottom. You see in the wheel well there, all those arrows are pointing out cocoons, and the underside of the side mirror of this truck here. So cocoons all over the place. All right, I've already seen some of those questions in the chat about management. I will tell you what we know so far. And the real answer here is we don't know a ton. And that's because it's a relatively new invasive insect, right? They didn't have to manage it or worry about it in its native range. And in Europe, a lot of the chemicals that we use here in the US are banned and they don't have access to them. So they haven't been evaluated the way that we would evaluate chemicals and want to use them in our landscape. So I'll talk about two major things that we're looking into. And one, whenever we get a new invasive, what are the natural enemies that are in play? I have a PhD student who is looking into that right now. There have been a lot of reports of different natural enemies that are attacking and eating elm zigzag sawfly larvae. This is an assassin bug in the Zelis genus right here. This has been reported all over the place, not just in North Carolina. This is literally in my hand from the very first day we found elm zigzag sawfly in North Carolina, and we have seen it very commonly since then. Virginia's reported it, Ohio's reported it, Canada's seen this assassin bug as well. So it is the one that we commonly associate with elm zigzag sawfly. But there have been other natural enemies that have been reported for this. Ladybugs, for example, especially ladybug larvae. Have been reported feeding on it, as well as ants. And we hopefully will come up with a larger list. My PhD student is also planning to do some natural enemies that are available commercially and see if those are effective, whether it's lacewings or ladybugs that might attack and feed on elm zigzag sawfly as well. But, this is one that we, can't wait for some of these more longer term sustainable management options. We wanted to see if there were chemical options available to homeowners. So we did a small pesticide trial. And the reason why it's small is because we were dealing with what we had. And we only have it in really one very localized area in North Carolina so far. But we do plan to expand our chemical trials to hopefully provide more active ingredients to people. So we used a site where there were 9 American elm on site. You can see where those elms are treated. It is the location of a home. It was actually the person who originally called in elm zigzag sawfly to the North Carolina Forest Service back in 2022. So he's getting a little bit of a benefit here since we're treating some of those trees as part of our trial. We split it up. We wanted to evaluate imidacloprid and dinotefuran, and that is because those are 2 chemicals that are pretty readily used in invasive forest pest management. They're accessible for homeowners, whether they want to do a DIY treatment or whether they want to get a chemical company to treat for them. And it has been reported, or it is documented to be effective against sawflies. So we wanted to see if that was the case here. So we split the trees up. We did soil injections of imidacloprid and dinotefuran. We randomized it. There were 6 large trees clustered around the house and 1 tiny tree, that number 7 there. So we split the larger trees in half, treated half with dinotefuran and treated the other half with imidacloprid. And then we randomized what that smaller tree got, and it ended up with imidacloprid as well. You can see the 2 control trees are actually separate from those other trees, and that is on purpose because we were doing soil injections, and these are systemic insecticides. We wanted to make sure there was a spatial distance between those control trees and the treated trees so that there wouldn't be transfer if the roots were close to one another or if the roots had grafted and it could share its chemical with our control trees. So what we found, we treated those trees in early spring. And we saw a significant decrease in the amount of elm zigzag sawfly on those leaves. So Dinotephron, we had a 60.6% decrease of elm zigzag sawfly, and that was the decrease in population by week. So weekly decrease. We saw a 48.8 weekly decrease with the imidacloprid. Both of them were significant, offering control. If you're more visual like I am, you can see how the populations started up high and then they dropped. The reason for that is we didn't know when elm zigzag sawfly emerged at the time we did the trial. So we were basically reactive. We were waiting for the elms to leaf out. We were waiting for elm zigzag sawfly to be out. And as soon as we saw that they were, we activated, treated them pretty closely. And then it takes a couple of weeks for those chemicals to disperse within the canopy and then become effective. But you can see how it drops pretty significantly for the dinotephron and the imidacloprid counts. You'll also notice that the control drops as well. And this is a population dynamic that we see across the region. We generally see higher populations early in the summer, and they seem to wane throughout the summer. This is not always the case. But generally we see it. Like in 2022, we saw a massive population amount in North Carolina that we haven't seen since. So really important to, kind of be aware of those population dynamics. And we are hoping, since we're monitoring phenology and monitoring elm zigzag sawfly emergence, we are currently working to build a model that can estimate when elm zigzag sawfly will be emerging so that people can treat 2 to 3 weeks prior to emergence and then protect that tree for the entire season. If you want an even better visual for these chemicals working, that tree that I showed you in the very beginning when we first found elm zigzag sawfly in North Carolina is on the left here. This is an American elm. And after 2 years of treatment, this one received the imidacloprid treatment. It was a very, very beautiful tree. It is one of those just makes me gasp how different it was after being treated. And the picture on the left was in August. The picture on the right was in July. So if there was large populations of elm zigzag sawfly, we would have expected it to look pretty similar. I'm looking in the chat right now. I'm going back to natural enemies. Cassie Russell said in southwestern Ontario, we've seen lots of zealous, good, lacewings, very nice, predatory stink bugs, and spiders predating on them. Yeah, that's really, really fantastic. And yeah, hopefully we have a whole list of all these other things that can help keep populations down. So with that, I will open it up for any questions. I will also scan through these comments and see if there's anything I missed. Mary asked, what does the adult look like? Hopefully I answered that for you, Mary. There's a key that we use online if you are interested in setting traps. I didn't get into the traps greatly, but typically we either use the soil emergence traps or yellow sticky cards, and the yellow sticky cards work just as good as emergence traps, if not better, for detecting the emergence of elm zigzag sawfly. So if you do want to trap in your area, you can set those yellow sticky cards in trees and see if you have elm zigzag sawfly nearby, but then you'll have to identify the adult. You can look at how they look with those dark bodies, the yellowish, whitish legs. But if you're planning to do this, we highly recommend using an online key to actually key them out, in which you'd look at wing venation and things like that. Thomas said, curious spread pattern in the USA with Michigan as a gap without. Is this a reporting anomaly or related to spread vector? So Thomas, Michigan actually does have reports of elm zigzag sawfly defoliation on iNaturalist. They have not yet confirmed it with a specimen. And we've decided with the map to stick with the ones that are actually confirmed and the species or the specimen sent off to USDA for confirmation before actually coloring that in. Once a state is confirmed by USDA, we do let the state regulatory agency or the state forestry agency, the state cooperators, do the reporting on the county level from there. But for that first state infestation, we do like to have a confident report right there. Is there a way to control them? Yeah, Sherry. Right now, we're telling people if they want to protect their trees, again, this is likely going to be mostly an aesthetic pest. Right now, we only know these two systemic chemicals that will work, but they are sawflies. We haven't evaluated, but I imagine many different contact insecticides work. We haven't evaluated BT. We have not evaluated insecticidal soap or any of those non-chemical ones, but we do have plans to, and we do hope to incorporate those. So we have a wide range of options for people to choose from. Um, so Barbara asks, instead of just watching that beautiful tree die, why is it not being treated? Barbara, we have had so many conversations about that. Um, One, yes, we could treat it. It is on the property. It belongs to a church. And I mean, they, are, very, very kind to let us do our research there. We are talking about treating it to save it for them and potentially planting some trees nearby. But the reality is, we kind of want to know if Elm zigzag sawfly can kill a tree, and that's the sad reality, and a little bit morbid. And well, maybe not morbid. It's a tree, and trees die. But we have talked about saving the tree because we agree it is a beautiful, beautiful specimen, and we're likely going to be considering that for next spring. And also like to see if we can have recovery of the tree, especially since it's already experienced dieback. Is there a way to control them? When is the best time? So, Sherry, what I did not share with the chemical um, trial that we did, we actually repeated that for a second year. And we used what we knew about the phenology to treat the trees before elm zigzag sawfly emerged, and we saw much better control. Like we didn't even see that early season peak of elm zigzag sawfly on the trees. However, we cannot rule out that there was chemical residues still within the tree. Since it had only been a year since we treated, and a lot of hardwood trees that are treated with systemic insecticides, typically you get one, but sometimes you get 2 years of control with them. So we can't discount that. But that being said, we're working on a model to help people decide when to treat, and we do recommend treating 2 to 3 weeks before elm zigzag sawfly emerges, so that the tree is, protected in its entirety before they emerge. Oh, in Winnipeg, you have yellow jackets going after them. That's cool. I mean, not great that there's yellow jackets being attracted to an area, but hey, maybe they're good for something. In Ontario, we did some spray trials in nurseries where we used spinosad, and it worked really well. That's great, Cassie. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe you and I should connect on some of these chemical things and maybe get a resource together. If you wouldn't mind shooting me your email, or I'll jot down your name and we can connect on that. That's great news. Michigan law, yeah, Barbara, that's right. We've seen a lot of elms lost to Dutch elm disease. I will say, when elm zigzag sawfly was first found in North America, we were kind of like, well, what elm is left? And the reality is there's a lot more out there than we realized once we started looking for it. I didn't go into it, but for the first 2 years after we detected it, we did a sentinel tree program where we asked state agencies to find elm trees and then record whether or not it had elm zigzag sawfly, and to do it at the beginning of the season, at the end of the season. And we had a lot of uninfested elms reported, but again, just kind of pointing to the fact that even though we lost the vast majority of our elm canopy years ago, at least, here in North Carolina and in a lot of the eastern states, we still see a fairly good number of them. Um, are smaller trees and saplings and seedlings more or less susceptible to the EZS? So we have not seen the difference ourselves here in North America as far as do they have a preference for what they attack? We have not studied that. As far as susceptibility, in Europe, they have recorded that some younger trees or newly planted trees did succumb. They actually died to elm zigzag sawfly, but that's because they were, not fully established, smaller trees and they got hit by a really hard defoliation event. Typically, though, if it's a healthy tree, we would expect them to bounce back. But again, this insect has a lot more questions than answers at this point. Um, does this pest affect slippery elm as heavily as American elm? Slippery elm has been reported as a host. We do not know currently if it has a preference, other than the anecdotal reports that Siberian elm is preferred over um, American elm. Where that large tree in the church parking lot or the church area is that's slowly declining, there are winged elms along the parking lot, and those are hit pretty hard as well. They're not as large as the American elm, but they are hit pretty hard as well. How long will the treatment have to be done? Sherry, we're not exactly sure yet. We are planning to test the residual insecticides. We are hoping that retreatment can happen on a 2 to 3 year cycle, but there's a high chance that it will have to be a 1 year cycle. And as far as how long will the treatment have to be done, in absence of a longer term management solution becoming viable, if people want to protect the trees, it would be indefinite. Now, again, people can choose to, take a year off and not treat the tree with an insecticide, and then treat it again to protect it, if they're trying to, save money, or if they have a lot of elm that they're trying to protect and kind of rotate it because it will take multiple years of defoliation. We didn't see the dieback in that large American elm until after 3 years of heavy, heavy defoliation. So something to keep in mind if the feasibility is an issue there. So with that, I think I answered all the questions in the chat, but I will open it up for even more questions and happy to answer any of those for you. My email is down there if you'd like to reach me after this, ask more questions. Cassie, I'd love to get up with you if you're willing.
All right, do we have any additional questions for Kelly? And one thing I might add too with identifying adult sawflies, unless you're an entomologist, sometimes the best answer with that is just don't. They are challenging. I work with sawfly a little bit.
That is very fair. Yeah, even that key that I suggested, it really only gets it down to the genus level.
And one of the interesting things too, since they are parthenogenetic, is that some sawfly species, they are assumed parthenogenetic because it is so difficult to find a male. And sometimes you may actually find one, and it's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to bring up. There has been one, and I forget where the collection is. There is one collection of a male in, oh, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in a collection somewhere. But where we suspect that it's a misidentification, not actually a male elm zigzag sawfly, but awaiting confirmation of that.
Oh, really? I didn't think that elm zigzag sawfly specifically ever produced them at all.
Yeah, that's what most of the literature says, and I agree. I don't think they do at all, but there is that one specimen that kind of has this little, makes you put a little asterisk there, I guess.
Hmm. Always interesting.
Yes,
All right.
insects are that way.
I am not seeing any additional questions popping up. So what I will do is I will say, Kelly, thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting presentation. I'm really happy you
Thank you.
were willing to donate your time today. And those were all great questions. So we are going to put this recording up on YouTube. So hello to all of you who are watching this on YouTube. And other than that, we will see everybody hopefully in a week or two when we do our final session with Dr. David Coyle. And other than that, everybody, you guys have a great week, and we will see you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.